The metal floor of the spaceship vibrated under Commander Velthara's clawed feet as she walked toward the prison cells. Her green scales caught the dim blue light that filled the corridors of the Void Reaper. This was the largest ship in the Keth Empire's Third Fleet, and today it carried their most important prisoner. Behind her walked senior scholar Zeftos, his arms full of data tablets and translation devices. His yellow eyes showed worry and confusion. In all his years studying different species across the galaxy, he had never faced a problem like this one. "Commander, I must tell you again," Zeftos said in his careful voice. "The markings on this human make no sense. We have tried every language in our database. We have compared them to all known human writing systems. Nothing matches." Velthara stopped walking and turned to face the scholar. Her black eyes were cold and angry. "Scholar, we have conquered 47 different species in the past century. Each time you and your team found the key to their language within days. Each time we understood their culture, their fears, their weaknesses. Why is one human different?" Zeftos shifted his tablets nervously. "This human is not like the others we have captured. His skin bears markings that seem to be text, but the symbols follow no pattern we recognize. They flow like water across his body, but they carry meaning we cannot grasp." They reached the viewing panel outside cell number 7. Through the thick, transparent metal, they could see Kim Dae-ho sitting in the center of his small prison. He sat with his legs crossed and his back straight. His eyes were closed, and he breathed slowly and calmly. But it was his skin that made both aliens stare in wonder and frustration. Intricate designs covered Kim Dae-ho's arms from his wrists to his shoulders. The markings flowed across his chest like rivers of black ink. They curved around his ribs and disappeared beneath his simple prison clothes. Even his neck showed traces of the strange symbols. The designs were beautiful. They seemed to dance in the dim light of the cell. Some symbols were small and delicate like flower petals. Others were bold and strong like mountain peaks. All of them connected in ways that suggested deep meaning and careful planning. "How long has he been sitting like that?" Velthara asked. 3 days, Commander. He has not moved except to eat the food we give him. He has not spoken a single word since we brought him aboard." Velthara pressed her hand against the viewing panel. "Show me the symbols again." Zeftos activated his largest tablet. The screen filled with close-up images of Kim Dae-ho's tattoos. He had taken hundreds of pictures during the prisoner's medical examination. Each symbol was clear and sharp in the photographs. "Look at this section on his left arm," the scholar said, pointing with one clawed finger. "These marks remind me of ancient writing, but not from any human culture we know. And here on his chest, these circular patterns could be mathematical, but they follow no logic our computers understand." "Perhaps they are religious," Velthara suggested. "Many species use body markings to show their beliefs." "That was my first thought," Zeftos replied. "But religious symbols usually repeat certain basic ideas. These markings never repeat. Each section seems to tell a different part of the same story." Fleet Admiral Nexara's voice suddenly filled the corridor through the communication system. "Commander Velthara, report to the bridge immediately. Bring the scholar with you." The 2 aliens hurried through the ship's corridors to the command center. The bridge was a vast, circular room with screens showing star maps and battle reports from across human space. Fleet Admiral Nexara stood at the center, her red scales marking her as one of the highest-ranking members of their species. "Commander," the Admiral said without turning around, "our invasion of human space has encountered unexpected difficulties. Their colony defenders seem to know our tactics before we use them. They predict our moves and counter our strategies with disturbing accuracy." Velthara and Zeftos exchanged worried glances. "Admiral, you believe the prisoner has something to do with this?" "I believe that human holds information critical to their defensive network. We captured him during the siege of Kepler 442b, at the center of their strongest resistance. He must know their plans and strategies." The Admiral finally turned to face them. "Yet you tell me he refuses to speak and we cannot read his body markings." "The markings are unlike anything in our experience," Zeftos said carefully. "They appear to be a form of writing, but the language is completely unknown." Admiral Nexara walked to a large screen showing Kim Dae-ho in his cell. The human still sat in the same position, calm and silent. "Perhaps the markings are not just decoration. Perhaps they serve a purpose we have not considered." "What kind of purpose?" Velthara asked. "Communications, storage, instructions. The humans are more clever than we first believed." They might have developed ways to hide information that our scanners cannot detect. Zeftos looked at his tablets again. Admiral, our medical scans show something unusual about the tattoos. They are not simply ink placed on the skin. They seem to be integrated into his cellular structure, as if they were grown rather than drawn. Explain. The symbols show faint bioelectric activity. They pulse very slowly, almost like a heartbeat. Our doctors believe the ink contains materials that interact with his nervous system. Admiral Nexera was quiet for a long moment. Around the bridge, other Keth officers worked at their stations, monitoring the fleet and the ongoing war. The soft sounds of their activities filled the silence. Double the guard on the prisoner, the Admiral finally said. Increase monitoring of his cell. I want to know if he moves, if he speaks, if he even changes his breathing pattern. And Scholar, continue your work on those markings. Find me the key to understanding them. Yes, Admiral. As they walked back toward the prison section, Zeftos spoke quietly to Velthera. Commander, there is something else about the markings that troubles me. What is it? In all our conquests, we have learned that every species fears something. We find their weakness, and we use it to break their resistance. But when I look at this human, when I study his markings, I do not see fear. I see confidence. He knows something we do not, and that knowledge makes him dangerous. In his cell, Kim Dae-ho continued to sit in meditation. His eyes remained closed, but his lips moved slightly as he whispered words in a language older than the Keth Empire. The tattoos on his skin pulsed gently, responding to sounds that no alien equipment could detect. He was not just a prisoner, he was a guardian, carrying secrets that his enemies could not imagine. And soon, very soon, those secrets would change everything. Dr. Park So-young sat in her small research cabin aboard the human ship Eternal Dawn. The soft hum of the ship's engines filled the quiet space as she studied ancient texts on her computer screen. Outside her window, distant stars moved slowly past as the ship traveled through deep space. A soft beeping sound interrupted her work. An encrypted message was coming through the Resistance communication network. Park touched her screen to accept the transmission. The message was short but urgent. Dr. Park, we need your help. The Keth have captured someone important. We believe his knowledge could change the war, but the aliens cannot understand his markings. We are sending you surveillance footage. Please study it immediately. Park frowned as she opened the attached files. Her specialty was ancient languages and dead writing systems. Before the war with the Keth Empire, her work had seemed purely academic. She studied old Korean texts and forgotten scripts that most people thought were useless. But everything changed when the aliens arrived. Suddenly, her knowledge of historical languages became valuable. The Resistance discovered that understanding the past could help fight the present war. The surveillance footage was grainy and dark, clearly taken by hidden cameras aboard a Keth ship. Park adjusted the image quality and leaned forward to see better. A human man sat in a prison cell. He appeared calm and peaceful, but Park gasped when she saw his tattoos. The markings covered his arms, chest, and neck in flowing patterns that seemed to tell a story. She recognized parts of the design immediately. Mixed among symbols she could not identify were characters she knew well. Ancient Korean Hanja writing, some of the oldest forms she had ever seen. But there were other scripts too, writing systems so old that only a few experts in the galaxy could read them. This is impossible, she whispered to herself. These markings are thousands of years old. How did this person get them? Park began taking screenshots of the clearest images. She enhanced each picture and studied the symbols carefully. The more she looked, the more excited and worried she became. The tattoos were not random decorations. They told a story about humanity's first encounter with beings from the stars, beings who claimed to be gods. Meanwhile, aboard the Keth flagship Void Reaper, senior scholar Zeftos was making discoveries of his own. He had been scanning the human prisoners' tattoos with increasingly powerful equipment. What he found disturbed him. Commander Velthera, he called as she entered his laboratory. You must see this. The laboratory was filled with advanced scanning devices and analysis equipment. Multiple screens showed different views of Kim Dae-ho's skin markings. Some images showed the tattoos in normal light. Others revealed them through heat sensors, magnetic field detectors, and bioelectric monitors. What have you found? Velthera asked. The markings are not what they appear to be, Zeftos said, his voice full of concern. Look at this deep tissue scan. He pointed to a screen showing a cross-section of Kim Dae-ho's arm. The tattoo ink appeared as bright lines running through the image. But instead of staying in the surface layer of skin, the markings went deeper. The symbols are integrated into his cellular structure, the scholar explained. The ink contains materials that bond with his nervous system. But more troubling, they show signs of bioelectric activity. What does that mean? The tattoos are alive in a sense. They pulse with energy that matches his brain waves. I believe they serve a function beyond decoration or even information storage. Velthara studied the scans carefully. As a military commander, she had learned to recognize when something posed a threat. These markings felt dangerous in ways she could not explain. Could they be weapons? She asked, possibly. Or they could be communication devices, or storage systems for complex information. Without understanding the language, we cannot know their true purpose. Back on the Eternal Dawn, Dr. Park So-young was making progress in reading the ancient texts. She had identified several passages that made her heart race with excitement and fear. The oldest symbols told the story of visitors from space who arrived on Earth thousands of years ago. These beings called themselves the Primarch Collective and claimed to be gods worthy of worship. They demanded tribute and threatened to destroy humanity if their demands were not met. But humanity had not surrendered. Instead, ancient Korean scholars had discovered something amazing about their visitors. The so-called gods had weaknesses that could be exploited through specific sounds and written symbols. Park found references to scholars named Lee Kyung-min and Han Ji-woo, who had led the resistance against the false gods. They had learned to use human voices and ancient writing as weapons against the invaders. This cannot be real, Park said aloud. But the evidence was written clearly in symbols that she could read and verify. The tattoos on the prisoner were not just historical records. They were instructions, a manual for fighting beings who claimed divine power over mortal species. Park realized that she needed to get closer to the prisoner to read all of his markings. The surveillance footage only showed parts of his body. To understand the complete message, she would need to see him in person. She opened a communication channel to the resistance leaders. "I need to get aboard that Keth ship," she said. "The prisoner carries knowledge that could end this war, but I must read his markings directly." "That is too dangerous," came the reply. "The Keth would capture you immediately. Then we make my capture look legitimate. Stage a battle. Let my ship get damaged just enough for the Keth to take me prisoner. Once I am aboard their flagship, I can reach the prisoner." There was a long silence before the resistance leaders responded. "Dr. Park, if we do this, you might not survive. Are you certain the risk is worth it?" Park looked again at the surveillance footage. Kim Dae-ho sat peacefully in his cell, but his tattoos carried secrets that could change everything. Ancient knowledge that humanity had preserved for thousands of years was finally ready to be used again. "Yes," she said firmly. "This knowledge is why we fight. Our ancestors left us instructions for defeating false gods. It is time to use them." The plan was set in motion immediately. The Eternal Dawn would join a resistance convoy and allow itself to be captured during a staged battle. Park would pretend to be a normal researcher, hoping the Keth would use her to communicate with their prisoner. As her ship prepared to leave for the dangerous mission, Park studied the ancient symbols one more time. She whispered a prayer in Old Korean, the same language that had once driven gods from the earth. Soon she would learn if those ancient words still held their power. In his prison cell aboard the Void Reaper, Kim Dae-ho sat in deep meditation. His breathing was slow and steady. His eyes remained closed as memories from thousands of years ago played in his mind. These were not his own memories, but stories passed down through his family for over 3,000 years. Kim Dae-ho was not just a colonial defender captured during battle. He was something much more important. He was a keeper of humanity's oldest and most dangerous secret. His family line could be traced back to ancient Korea, to the kingdom of Gojoseon, when beings from the stars first came to Earth. In his mind, he could see his ancestor Choi Woo-jin standing in a rice field outside the ancient capital. The year was 980 BC and the harvest season had just begun. But instead of golden grain, the sky filled with massive ships that blocked out the sun. Young Woo-jin watched in terror as the alien vessels settled over the major cities of his kingdom. The ships were enormous, each one larger than the biggest mountain. Their smooth metal surfaces reflected no light, making them appear like holes cut from the sky itself. When the beings emerged from their ships, they looked almost human, but taller and more beautiful than any person Woo-jin had ever seen. They had pale skin that seemed to glow with inner light. Their eyes were silver like polished metal. When they spoke, their voices carried impossible authority. "We are the Primarch Collective," their leader announced to the gathered humans. "We have traveled across the galaxy bringing order to primitive species. You will worship us as gods as is proper. You will provide tribute of food, materials, and workers. Those who obey will be protected. Those who resist will be destroyed." The Primarch leader gestured toward a distant hill. A beam of light shot from his hand and struck the hilltop. The entire hill vanished in a flash of energy, leaving only a smooth crater where it had been. But Choi Woo-jin noticed something the other humans missed. When the Primarch used his power, his silver eyes flickered for just a moment. A sign of effort, perhaps even strain. The young man ran to the capital city to find the royal scholars. The king's advisors, led by the wise Lee Kyung-min, were already debating what to do about the invaders. "We must surrender," said one scholar. "They have power beyond our understanding." "No," said Lee Kyung-min. "I have studied their leader carefully. When he destroyed the hill, I saw something important. These beings are not truly gods. They are powerful, but they are not perfect." Over the following weeks, the scholars worked frantically to understand their enemies. They watched the Primarchs carefully, noting every detail of their behavior and abilities. Han Ji-woo, the kingdom's master of ancient writings, made the first breakthrough. "I have observed that the invaders react strangely to certain sounds," she reported. "When the temple bells ring at specific frequencies, they show signs of discomfort." Lee Kyung-min nodded thoughtfully. "And I have noticed that they avoid looking at certain old symbols carved into our stone monuments. Perhaps there is something about our oldest writing that disturbs them." The scholars began a series of careful experiments. They tested different sounds, different written symbols, different combinations of both. Slowly, they discovered that the Primarchs had weaknesses that could be exploited. "Their neural systems operate on frequencies similar to our own," Lee Kyung-min explained to Choi Woo-jin. "But where we adapted to live on this planet, they did not. Certain sounds that are natural to us cause interference in their minds." Han Ji-woo had made an even more important discovery. "Our oldest writing systems contain symbols that create specific patterns when viewed together. These patterns seem to overload their visual processing systems." Working together, the scholars developed a plan. They would not fight the Primarchs with weapons of metal or fire. They would fight them with knowledge, with sound, and with the written word. The resistance began with small acts. Humans would gather near Primarch outposts and chant ancient songs. The aliens would become confused and disoriented, making mistakes in their duties. Temple bells were rung in special patterns that made the invaders uncomfortable. Stone tablets with old Korean symbols were placed in locations where Primarchs would see them. But the greatest weapon came from a discovery made by Choi Woo-jin himself. While studying the effects of different symbol combinations, he found that certain patterns worked best when written on human skin. "The symbols must be placed on living tissue," he explained to the other scholars. "When written on a human body, they create bioelectric fields that can disrupt Primarch neural activity at close range." The first volunteers allowed the scholars to tattoo the special symbols on their arms and chests. These brave men and women became known as fire bearers because they carried the flame that could burn away false worship. Kim Dae-ho's ancestor, Choi Woo-jin, was among the first to receive the markings. The tattoos were applied using ink mixed with rare earth elements found in certain mountain caves. The process was long and painful, but the results were remarkable. When a fire-bearer came within a few meters of a Primarch, the alien would experience severe neural disruption. Their advanced abilities would fail. Their commanding presence would crumble. They would appear as what they truly were: powerful beings, but not gods. The first successful test happened when Choi Woo-jin approached a Primarch patrol near his village. The alien commander was demanding tribute from the local farmers when Woo-jin walked calmly into their midst. The moment he came close, the Primarch commander staggered backward. His silver eyes flickered wildly, and his voice lost its divine authority. He began speaking in confused fragments, unable to form complete thoughts. "What sorcery is this?" the alien gasped. "No sorcery," Woo-jin replied. "Only the truth. You are not gods. You are beings like us with strengths and weaknesses." The other Primarchs in the patrol tried to help their commander, but they too began experiencing neural disruption as more fire-bearers emerged from hiding among the villagers. Within minutes, the entire alien patrol was writhing on the ground, their enhanced abilities completely disabled. Word of this success spread quickly through the human resistance. More volunteers came forward to receive the sacred tattoos. The scholars refined their techniques, creating more powerful symbol combinations and more effective ink mixtures. Lee Kyung-min developed a system for organizing the firebearers into coordinated groups. Each group would be responsible for disrupting Primarch operations in their region. The goal was not to kill the invaders, but to prove they were not divine. Han Ji-woo created the master text that would be tattooed onto the most important guardians. This complete record contained the full history of humanity's resistance, the detailed instructions for creating the bioelectric fields, and the ancient words that would activate the symbol's power. The final battle took place at the Primarch Command Center, built where the modern city of Seoul would later stand. 100 fire-bearers surrounded the alien complex at dawn, their tattoos hidden beneath traditional Korean clothing. At precisely noon, when the sun was directly overhead, the fire-bearers threw off their outer garments and began chanting in unison. Their tattoos blazed with bioelectric light as they spoke words of power that had been carefully designed to overload Primarch neural systems. The effect was immediate and devastating. Every Primarch in the complex collapsed as their enhanced minds shut down completely. Their advanced technology failed. Their ships lost power and crashed to the ground. The beings who had claimed godhood over humanity lay helpless on the earth they had tried to rule. The leader of the Primarchs, the being who had destroyed a mountain to demonstrate his power, crawled toward Choi Woo-jin on hands and knees. His silver eyes were now dull and confused. "What have you done to us?" the alien leader whispered. "We have shown you the truth," Choi Woo-jin replied. "We are human. We are not gods, and neither are you. No being has the right to claim worship from another. But our power, our technology, our superiority means nothing without wisdom and humility. You came to our world demanding worship because you were strong, but strength without justice is tyranny, not divinity." The surviving Primarchs were given a choice. They could stay on Earth and live as equals among humans, or they could leave and never return. Most chose to leave, gathering their remaining technology and fleeing into deep space. But before they left, their leader spoke one final warning. "This is not over. We will not forget what you have done here. Someday we will return with greater power. And if you do," Han Ji-woo replied, "we will be ready. The knowledge of how to resist false gods will never be lost. We will pass it down through generations until the end of time." The Primarchs departed Earth that same day, but they did not disappear from the galaxy. They traveled to distant stars and began building an empire among alien species who had never learned to resist claims of divine authority. Over the centuries, the Primarch collective evolved and changed. They interbred with other species, modified their genetics, and eventually became the foundation for several major galactic civilizations. But they never forgot the small blue world where primitive humans had refused to worship them. Back in the present, Kim Dae-ho opened his eyes in his prison cell. The memories of his ancestors were as clear as if he had lived them himself. The Keth Empire did not know their true history. The battle was perfectly staged. Dr. Park So-young watched from the bridge of the Eternal Dawn as Keth fighters approached her convoy. The human ships fired their weapons, but their shots were carefully aimed to miss. The aliens returned fire with equal precision, damaging engines and weapon systems without destroying the vessels. "Hull breach on Deck 3, reported the ship's captain. "Life support is failing in sections 4 through 6. "Excellent," Park said quietly. To any watching Keth sensors, her ship appeared to be critically damaged and ready to surrender. The alien tractor beams grabbed the Eternal Dawn and pulled it toward the massive Keth flagship. Park could see the Void Reaper through her window, its dark metal hull bristling with weapon arrays and scanning equipment. Within hours, she found herself in a Keth detention cell. The aliens had searched her belongings and found exactly what she wanted them to find: translation equipment, language databases, and research files about human communication systems. Commander Velthara came to her cell the next morning. The reptilian alien studied Park through the transparent barrier with cold, calculating eyes. "You are Dr. Park So-young," Velthara said. It was not a question. "Our intelligence files show that you are a specialist in human languages and ancient writing systems." "That is correct," Park replied, trying to sound worried and defeated. Good, we have a prisoner who refuses to speak. His body bears markings that our scholars cannot understand. You will help us decode these symbols. I am not a traitor, Park said, putting defiance in her voice. I will not help you harm my people. Velthara's mouth curved in what might have been a smile. Dr. Park, we are not asking you to betray military secrets. We simply want to understand why this human has covered his skin with meaningless decorations. Surely there is no harm in explaining tattoos to us. Park pretended to consider this. If the markings are truly just decorations, then I suppose there would be no harm. But I want to see the prisoner first. An hour later, guards escorted Park through the corridors of the Void Reaper. Keth crew members stopped their work to stare at her as she passed. Most had never seen a human up close before. They reached the prison section and Park saw Kim Dae-ho for the first time in person. He sat in meditation just as he had in the surveillance footage, but now she could see his tattoos clearly. Her breath caught in her throat. The markings were even more extensive than she had realized. They covered not just his arms and chest, but also his back, his neck, and parts of his legs that had been hidden in the grainy video. Well, Commander Velthara asked. What do you see? Park forced her expression to remain neutral. The markings appear to be text of some kind, but they use writing systems that are very old. Some of these symbols have not been used for thousands of years. Can you read them? Some parts, perhaps, but this will take time. These are not simple tattoos. They tell a complex story using multiple writing systems from different time periods. Inside the cell, Kim Dae-ho opened his eyes and looked directly at Park. For just a moment, their gazes met. In that instant, they communicated without words. He knew who she was and why she had come. She knew that he was ready to begin the next phase of their plan. I need to examine the markings more closely, Park said. And I need to speak with the prisoner. Some of these symbols might be names or places that only he can explain. Velthara considered this request. You may examine him, but you will be monitored at all times. Our translation devices will record every word you speak. I understand. The guards allowed Park into Kim Dae-ho's cell. She knelt beside him and began studying his tattoos with a magnifying device. To watching aliens, she appeared to be carefully examining each symbol. But Park was actually reading the complete story for the first time. The tattoos began with ancient Korean Hanja characters that described the arrival of beings from space. The text flowed from his left shoulder down his arm, telling how these beings claimed to be gods. On his right arm, the symbols described the resistance led by scholars like Lee Kyung-min and Han Ji-woo. The text explained how ancient Koreans discovered that the false gods had weaknesses that could be exploited through sound and written symbols. Across Kim Dae-ho's chest, the most important information was written. Here were the detailed instructions for creating bioelectric fields that could disrupt Primarch neural systems. The symbols showed exactly which frequencies to use, which written patterns were most effective, and how to combine them for maximum impact. Park pretended to be troubled by what she was reading. This is very strange, she said aloud, knowing the Keth translation devices were recording her words. These markings seem to describe some kind of religious ceremony, but they also contain what looks like technical information. What kind of technical information? Velthara asked. Instructions for creating specific sound frequencies, patterns for arranging written symbols. It almost seems like a manual for some kind of ancient technology. Kim Dae-ho spoke for the first time since his capture. It is not technology, he said in perfect standard language. It is knowledge. Every Keth in the area turned to stare at him. After weeks of silence, the prisoner was finally speaking. What kind of knowledge? Commander Velthara demanded. Kim Dae-ho looked directly at the alien commander. Knowledge of how to recognize false gods and how to refuse their commands. Park felt excitement building in her chest. She had read enough of the tattoos to understand what Kim Dae-ho was preparing to do. The symbols on his skin were not just historical records. They were activation codes. The markings describe an ancient Korean religious practice, she said, continuing her deception. Believers would tattoo prayer symbols on their bodies and chant specific words to commune with their ancestors. Harmless religious nonsense, Velthara said dismissively, but Senior Scholar Zeftos, who had been watching silently, stepped forward with concern in his yellow eyes. Commander, I'm detecting increased bioelectric activity from the prisoner's markings. The tattoos are beginning to show energy spikes that match his brainwave patterns. Park looked at Kim Dae-ho and saw that his tattoos were indeed beginning to glow very faintly. The change was so subtle that only the most sensitive equipment could detect it. "It is probably just a stress response," she said quickly. "Being imprisoned and interrogated would cause anyone's nervous system to become active." But Kim Dae-ho was building up the bioelectric charge that would activate his living weapons. He had spent weeks in meditation preparing his mind and body for this moment. The ancient knowledge encoded in his skin was ready to be used. "Dr. Park," he said quietly, "would you like to hear the old songs? The ones our ancestors sang when they refused to bow to false gods?" Park met his eyes and nodded. She knew that once he began chanting, there would be no turning back. The Keth Empire was about to learn why their Primarch ancestors had fled Earth 3,000 years ago. "Yes," she said, "I would like to hear the old songs very much." Kim Dae-ho closed his eyes and began to speak in a language that no Keth translation device recognized. The words were ancient Korean, older than any text in their databases. His voice was soft at first, barely above a whisper. Dr. Park So-young felt shivers run down her spine as she heard the ancient chant. She had studied these words in old books, but she had never heard them spoken aloud. The pronunciation was perfect, passed down through generations of Kim Dae-ho's family. "What is he saying?" Commander Velthara demanded. "It sounds like a prayer," Park replied, her voice carefully controlled. An old Korean chant asking ancestors for guidance. But Park knew the truth. Kim Dae-ho was not praying to ancestors. He was activating the instructions written in his skin. Each word of the ancient chant corresponded to specific symbols in his tattoos. As he spoke, those symbols began to respond. The glow in his tattoos grew stronger, though it was still barely visible to the naked eye. The bioelectric charge that he had built up during weeks of meditation was finally being released. The rare earth elements in his tattoo ink began to resonate at frequencies that affected Primarch-descended nervous systems. Senior scholar Zeftos stepped closer to his monitoring equipment. His yellow eyes widened as he read the data streaming across his screens. "Commander, the bioelectric activity is increasing rapidly. The prisoner's neural output is reaching levels I have never seen in any species. Is he trying to harm himself?" Velthara asked. "No," Zeftos said, his voice filled with growing worry. "The energy is not being directed inward. It is being projected outward from his body." Kim Dae-ho continued chanting, his voice growing stronger. The ancient words flowed like water, each syllable precisely pronounced. The tattoos on his arms began to pulse with soft light, the symbols appearing to move and dance on his skin. Park So-young watched in fascination and fear. She was witnessing something that had not happened for 3,000 years. A fire-bearer was preparing to light his flame. Around the ship, Keth crew members began to experience strange effects. In the engine room, technicians found themselves unable to concentrate on their duties. Their thoughts became scattered and confused. Some experienced severe headaches that seemed to come from nowhere. On the bridge, navigation officers reported that their instruments were showing impossible readings. Star charts that had been perfectly clear moments before now appeared blurred and distorted. "What is happening to our systems?" Fleet Admiral Nexara's voice crackled through the communication system. Commander Velthara pressed her communicator. "Admiral, the human prisoner has begun some kind of ritual chanting. Our scholar reports unusual bioelectric activity. Stop him immediately." But when Velthara turned back to the cell, she found that she could not focus her eyes properly on Kim Dae-ho. The human seemed to shimmer and blur as if he were surrounded by invisible flames. The tattoos on his visible skin now glowed with unmistakable light. Kim Dae-ho's chanting grew louder and more powerful. The ancient Korean words echoed through the corridor, and with each syllable, more Keith crew members throughout the ship began to experience neural disruption. Dr. Park So-young watched Zeftos stumble backward, his clawed hands pressed to his head, the alien scholar's sophisticated brain, enhanced by Primarch genetic modifications, was being overloaded by frequencies it was never designed to handle. "The symbols," Park said aloud as if making a sudden discovery. "They are not just decorations. They are creating some kind of electromagnetic field." Commander Velthara tried to activate the security systems in Kim Dae-ho's cell, but her hands shook too much to operate the controls properly. The bioelectric pulse emanating from the human was interfering with her nervous system. "Impossible," she gasped. "Humans do not have this kind of ability." "We learned it from your ancestors," Kim Dae-ho said, his voice now carrying impossible authority. His eyes opened and seemed to burn with inner fire. 3,000 years ago, Beings who called themselves gods came to our world. We refused to worship them. We drove them away. The tattoos across his chest began to blaze with light. The symbols that Park had struggled to read in dim surveillance footage now stood out clearly against his skin. Instructions for defeating false gods written in the language of humanity's first victory over tyrannical aliens. You lie, Velthara snarled, but her voice was weak and uncertain. The Primarch Collective, Kim Dae-ho continued, his chanting now mixed with spoken words. They fled Earth after we proved they were not divine. They went into deep space to build an empire among the stars, an empire that eventually became the Keth. Park So-young felt the bioelectric field growing stronger around them. Her human nervous system was adapted to these frequencies, but she could see that every Keth in the area was struggling to remain conscious. Your DNA carries Primarch genetic markers, Kim Dae-ho said to Commander Velthara. Your technology is built on Primarch designs. Your entire civilization exists because our ancestors allowed your gods to escape, instead of destroying them completely. The light from his tattoos now filled the corridor. Security cameras throughout the ship began to malfunction, as the bioelectric pulse interfered with their circuits. Keth technology, based on bio-integrated systems inherited from the Primarchs, was failing throughout the vessel. On the bridge, Fleet Admiral Nexera watched in horror as her command systems shut down one by one. Navigation failed first, followed by weapons control and communication arrays. Throughout her fleet, other ships were experiencing similar failures. All vessels report system malfunctions. Her communications officer gasped before collapsing at his station. The bio-neural networks are shutting down. Kim Dae-ho stood up in his cell, his entire body now surrounded by pulsing light. The ancient chant reached its climax. Words of power that had once driven gods from Earth and were now crippling their descendants among the stars. We are the fire-bearers, he declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the ship. We carry the flame that burns away false worship. We refuse to bow to any being that claims dominion over free minds. The bioelectric pulse reached critical intensity. Throughout the Keith fleet, ships lost power and drifted helplessly in space. Alien crew members fell unconscious as their Primarch-enhanced nervous systems overloaded completely. Dr. Park So-young, protected by her fully human genetics, helped Kim Dae-ho out of his powerless cell. The door controls had failed along with every other system on the ship. Is it over? She asked. Kim Dae-ho looked at his tattoos, which were now fading back to normal ink. The bioelectric charge was spent, but its work was done. This part is over. But now comes the harder task. What task? Teaching the galaxy that no being deserves worship simply because they claim to be gods. The Kith will have to learn to live as equals rather than conquerors. Around them, the Void Reaper drifted dark and silent through space. The proud flagship of the Keth Third Fleet had been brought low by nothing more than ancient words and the courage of those who refused to kneel before false divinity. The fire-bearers had lit their flame once again. The silence aboard the Void Reaper was complete. Emergency lighting cast dim red shadows through the corridors, as Kim Dae-ho and Dr. Park So-young made their way toward the ship's communication center. Their footsteps echoed in the empty hallways. Unconscious Keth crew members lay scattered throughout the vessel. They were not dead, but their nervous systems had been overwhelmed by frequencies their Primarch-modified brains could not process. It would be hours before any of them regained consciousness. How long will the effect last? Park asked as they stepped over the prone form of Senior Scholar Zeftos. For the crew, a few hours at most, Kim Dae-ho replied. His tattoos had returned to their normal appearance, but he moved with obvious exhaustion. For their technology, much longer. The bio-neural networks that run their ships were designed by the Primarchs. They are vulnerable to the same frequencies that affect the aliens themselves. They reached the communication center and found it empty except for unconscious technicians. The main control panels were dark, their bio-integrated circuits fried by the bioelectric pulse. Park studied the alien equipment with interest. Can we get it working? We do not need to, Kim Dae-ho said. He pulled a small device from his pocket, a human transmitter that had been hidden during his capture. This will broadcast on frequencies that other fire-bearers can detect. There are others like you? Kim Dae-ho smiled. Did you think my family was the only one to preserve the ancient knowledge? There are fire-bearers scattered across human space, most of them unaware of their true purpose. but when they hear the activation frequencies, they will remember. He activated the transmitter and began broadcasting the same ancient Korean chant that had disabled the Keth fleet. The signal would travel faster than light through the quantum communication network, reaching human colonies throughout the galaxy. On distant worlds, men and women who had carried strange tattoos their entire lives suddenly felt those markings begin to warm against their skin. They did not fully understand what was happening, but genetic memory thousands of years old stirred in their minds. Lee Min-ho, a farmer on the agricultural world of Kepler 186F, stopped his work in the middle of planting season. The symbols tattooed on his back began to glow softly. Words in ancient Korean filled his thoughts, words his grandmother had taught him as a child. Choi Hai-won, an engineer aboard a human space station, felt her arm tattoos pulse with energy. She had always wondered why her family insisted on the traditional markings. Now she understood. She was a guardian of humanity's greatest secret. Throughout human space, the descendants of firebearers answered the call. They began chanting the ancient words, their tattoos blazing with bioelectric fire. Every Keth ship within range experienced immediate system failures. Back on the Void Reaper, Park monitored the ship's passive sensors. The entire Keth fleet has lost power. Their bio-neural networks are completely offline. Kim Dae-ho nodded. The Primarchs built their technology to interface directly with their enhanced nervous systems. It made their devices incredibly advanced but also vulnerable. When we disrupt their neural patterns, we disrupt everything that depends on them. Fleet Admiral Nexara was the first Keth officer to regain consciousness. She awoke on the bridge of her flagship to find emergency power, barely keeping life support running. Her neural implants, which had connected her directly to the ship's systems, were completely dead. "Status report," she called weakly. The few bridge crew members who had awakened could barely speak. Their enhanced minds, modified with Primarch genetic improvements, had suffered the worst effects of the bioelectric pulse. "All systems offline, Admiral," one officer managed to say. "The bio-neural networks show no activity. Communications are down across the fleet." Nexara struggled to understand what had happened. The Keth Empire had conquered dozens of species using their superior technology and enhanced abilities. Nothing should have been able to disable an entire fleet so completely. "The human prisoner," she said suddenly. "What happened to the human prisoner?" Before anyone could answer, Kim Dae-ho and Dr. Park So-young entered the bridge. The Keth officers tried to reach for their weapons, but their hands shook too badly to operate any equipment. "Admiral Nexara," Kim Dae-ho said respectfully. "We need to talk." "You did this," she accused. "You destroyed our ship somehow." "We did not destroy anything," Park replied. "We simply reminded your technology of its origins. Your bio-neural systems are based on Primarch designs. When we use the frequencies that affect Primarch nervous systems, your technology fails as well." Admiral Nexara stared at them in confusion. "Primarch? What are you talking about?" Kim Dae-ho sat down across from the alien commander. His exhaustion was obvious, but his voice remained strong. 3,000 years ago, beings calling themselves the Primarch Collective came to Earth. They claimed to be gods and demanded worship from humanity. Impossible. There are no records of any species called the Primarchs. Because they changed their name after fleeing our world, Park explained. They went into deep space and eventually became the founders of your empire. Your DNA, your technology, even your social structure all trace back to them. "You lie," Nexara said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Your own medical scanners can verify it," Kim Dae-ho replied. "Compare Keth genetic patterns with the biosignatures we just used to disable your ships. You will find they match perfectly." Dr. Park So-young activated a portable scanner and showed the results to the Admiral. The data was undeniable. Keth DNA contained genetic markers that resonated exactly with the frequencies Kim Dae-ho had broadcast. "This proves nothing," Nexara said desperately. "Even if we share some ancient connection, it does not give you the right to attack our fleet." "We attacked no one," Kim Dae-ho said calmly. "We simply refuse to accept your claim of superiority over us, just as our ancestors refused to worship the beings you descended from." Throughout the Keth fleet, other commanders were awakening to similar revelations. Their ships drifted powerless in space, their crews unable to operate any of their advanced systems. For the first time in centuries, the mighty Keth Empire found itself completely helpless. On human worlds across the galaxy, The fire-bearers continued their ancient chant. The bioelectric pulse spread through space, disabling every Keth vessel it encountered. But the humans did not use their advantage to attack the helpless aliens. Instead, they began broadcasting messages of peace. "People of the Keth Empire," came a transmission from the human colony of New Sol. "We do not wish to destroy you. We wish only to be free from your domination. Your ancestors once claimed to be gods over humanity. We proved them wrong then, and we prove them wrong now." Similar messages came from dozens of human worlds. The tone was firm but not cruel. Humanity had gained a tremendous advantage over their enemies, but they chose to use it for liberation rather than conquest. Admiral Nexara listened to these broadcasts with growing amazement. "Why do you not attack us while we are helpless? This would be the perfect time to destroy our entire fleet." "Because we are not conquerors," Kim Dae-ho replied. "We never wanted to rule over other species. We only wanted to be left alone to choose our own path. But you have defeated us completely. You could take control of our empire." Park So-young shook her head. "We do not want your empire. We want something much simpler. We want recognition that no being, no matter how powerful or advanced, has the right to claim godhood over another species." As the hours passed, more Keth vessels throughout the galaxy lost power. The bioelectric pulse carried by quantum communication networks reached every corner of their empire. Millions of aliens who had believed themselves superior to all other life forms found themselves humbled by ancient human knowledge. But Kim Dae-ho had one more message to broadcast. Using the Void Reaper's emergency communication system, he sent out a transmission that reached every fire-bearer in human space. "Brothers and sisters," he said in ancient Korean, "our work is done. Let the flame fade now. We have proven our point." Across the galaxy, the fire-bearers felt their tattoos cool and return to normal. The bioelectric pulse gradually weakened and disappeared. Keth bio-neural systems began to come back online, though it would take days for them to reach full functionality. Admiral Nexara watched her bridge systems slowly reactivate. "You are giving us back our power? We never wanted to take it from you permanently," Kim Dae-ho said. "We only wanted to prove that your power does not make you gods." The war between humanity and the Keth Empire officially ended 3 months later. The peace negotiations were unlike anything in galactic history. For the first time, the Keth found themselves negotiating as equals rather than as conquerors. Dr. Park So-young spent those months teaching Keth scholars to read the ancient texts that told the true history of their origins. Many aliens struggled to accept that their mighty empire was built on a foundation of false divinity, but the evidence was overwhelming. Kim Dae-ho returned to his family farm on Kepler 442b. His tattoos had faded to ordinary ink, their power spent. But the knowledge they had carried lived on in the minds of humans across the galaxy. On quiet evenings, he would sit with his young nephew and tell him stories of the ancient fire-bearers. The boy would listen with wide eyes as his uncle explained how words and symbols could be more